Hello, everyone. I'm grateful to have you here with me in this quiet, timeless space we call black screen history. Tonight we're setting off once more on a slow, steady cruise into the past. One of our most requested topics and one of the most astonishing stories ever told. This time we'll be journeying back to the early 13th century, across the great open steppe of Central Asia, to meet a figure whose name still echoes like thunder across the centuries. Genghis Khan, the man who united the Mongol tribes, shattered kingdoms, and built the largest land empire the world has ever known. But before we begin, let's take a moment to arrive. Wherever you are sitting or lying down, allow your body to settle into stillness. Let your breath soften, and if you'd like, gently close your eyes. Release the thoughts of today. Let go of the weight of your to-do lists, of expectations, of noise. Feel your shoulders soften, your jaw loosen, your hands and arms relax heavy and warm. Feel the stillness in your legs and the quiet in your chest. You're here now, and that's all that matters. With each breath, you drift deeper into calm, into curiosity, into quiet wonder. Tonight, I'll be your guide. Together, we'll step into a world of windswept deserts, lost empires, and ancient vengeance. As we uncover how a single act of disrespect would ignite one of the most brutal retributions in recorded history. Our journey into the heart of the Mongol Empire begins now. They say it only takes a spark. Not a battle, not an army, not even a war cry. Just a moment, a small insult, a single breath of arrogance drifting in the wrong direction. And then, like dry grass to a flame, the world burns. Tonight we begin a journey, quiet, slow, through a tale etched in smoke and ash. A story of retribution, not whispered between lovers, but carved into the bones of cities that no longer exist. This is the story of Genghis Khan, the man of the steppe, the Khan of Khans, a leader born in hardship, molded by exile, sharpened by battle, who rose to unite the scattered, feuding tribes of Mongolia into a single, thunderous force. Under his rule, they would ride farther and faster than any army before them, shaping the greatest contiguous land empire in human history. But this story doesn't begin with glory. It begins with trust. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan stood not as a conqueror, but as a diplomat. Having conquered northern China and pacified the east, he turned his attention to the west, not with steel, but with silk. To the west lay the Khwarazmian Empire, a mighty Islamic state, rich with culture, intellect, and commerce. Its territory spanned across what is now Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, stretching like a jewel chain across the desert. Its ruler, Shah ad-Din Muhammad II, held his court in gilded halls, a man of ambition, power, and pride. And so the Khan extended a hand, a peaceful one. In 1218, he sent a caravan not of soldiers, but of Muslim merchants to the Khwarazmian border city of Otrar. Their journey was one of commerce. They bore goods, letters, intentions, not threats. They came under the protection of Genghis Khan's name, a name feared by many, respected by all. But in Otrar, something went wrong. The city's governor, Inalchuk, also known by the title Genghis ad-Din, looked upon the caravan not with welcome, but with suspicion. Some say he saw spies, others say he saw profit, or perhaps he simply feared foreign influence so close to his walls. Whatever his motive, his action was swift and severe. He arrested them, the entire caravan. Dozens of peaceful merchants detained, humiliated, and soon after executed. All of them except one. One survivor, nameless to history, escaped, slipping into the endless dust of the steppe, carrying the terrible truth back to Mongolia, back to Genghis Khan. Can you imagine the silence that must have followed? The fire had been lit, and yet the Khan remained calm. He did not strike, not yet. Instead, he did what many would not expect from a man so often remembered for blood and conquest. He sent a diplomatic mission, emissaries with clear instructions, words instead of weapons. Their message was simple, reasonable: punish the governor, make reparations, avoid war. But the Shah answered with contempt. Not only did he refuse the demand, he made a performance of his defiance. He had the chief envoy of the Mongol delegation beheaded, and in a chilling gesture, he sent the man's severed head back east, a bloodied package of mockery. It was a choice, a final insult, a door slammed shut. And with that, Genghis Khan chose not words, but war. The year was 1219. The world would not be the same again. The Mongol response was swift, coordinated, and merciless. They descended upon Khwarazmia with precision and fury, not a chaotic mob, but a well-drilled machine of destruction. The empire's cities, once proud and cultured, were crushed beneath hooves and ash. The violence was not only effective, it was symbolic, total, erasing not just resistance, but the very memory of resistance. Take the city of Gurgenj, for instance, a vibrant urban center on the edge of the empire. According to the 13th century Persian historian Automatic Juveni, Genghis ordered 50,000 soldiers to execute 24 citizens each. If his math is to be believed, that would mean 1.2 million souls extinguished. Was it true or an exaggeration to chill the blood of future readers? Even now, historians aren't certain. But one thing is, the Khwarazmian Empire ceased to exist, not over decades, not through slow decay, but within 2 years it was obliterated. Cities turned to tombs, rivers red, fields silent. And it all began not with a war, but with a trade mission, a caravan, a show of disrespect, a spark. The lesson that history can pivot on the smallest things. A gesture, an insult, a single head sent back across the steppe. As you lay still now, letting the details soften into the edges of your sleep, remember, the world you live in was shaped not only by battles and borders, but by moments. And in the dark, quiet sands of Central Asia, one such moment grew into a storm that changed everything. Myth or reality? History is often clear in hindsight. Dates, names, empires risen, cities fallen. But sometimes, just sometimes, it begins to blur. Facts become fog, truth hides behind stories, and those stories take on lives of their own. Tonight, as the fire dims and the winds grow still, we drift into that soft in-between. A place where legend meets reality. Because when it comes to Genghis Khan, the lines are never quite clean. There is no doubt that his invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire was real, that it was brutal, that it left ashes where once there were cities. The maps changed, the people vanished, the ground itself seemed to remember the screams. And yet, how did it begin? We know the caravan was attacked. We know the envoy was beheaded. We know Genghis responded with overwhelming force. But still we ask, why did the Khwarazmians provoke a war they could not win? This is where the smoke begins to rise. Because while history gives us the shape of events, the soul of those events, the decisions, the motives, the emotions behind them, often come wrapped in myth. And when it comes to Genghis Khan, the myths are many. Born as Temujin, a child of the steppe, he is said to have killed his half-brother over a scrap of food. A child with blood on his hands, a child who would one day command the fate of nations. They say he was shot by an enemy archer in battle, and instead of executing the man, Genghis made him a general. He saw not just death, but talent. And then there's the mystery of his burial, still unsolved to this day. They say that every person who helped bury him was killed to keep his final resting place a secret, that his tomb was hidden so well, no conqueror, no scholar, no explorer has ever found it. Is it true, or is it legend, grown tall over centuries of retelling? Historians are not certain. You see, much of what we know about the Mongol conquests comes from second-hand accounts, from writers who lived after the events, or who heard them from the lips of those who had fought against the Mongols. That means every sentence, every claim, every gory detail must be filtered through time and bias. Some chroniclers saw Genghis Khan as a monster, others a force of divine justice. But few saw him as a man. And the few who didn't always agree. So how do we make sense of it all? When we peel away the myth, the silver poured into mouths, the skull pyramids, the rivers running red, we still find the core of the truth. The Khwarazmian Empire did fall. Its cities were destroyed. The Mongols did invade. That much is certain. But the questions still whisper at the edges. Why would Shah Muhammad II, ruling over a large and sophisticated empire, provoke such a war? Why insult the one man no one else dared challenge? He had seen what the Mongols were capable of. He knew they had recently crushed Kara Kitai, a neighboring state, and taken the region with shocking speed. he knew Genghis had already broken mighty China. So why risk everything? Some say he underestimated the Mongols, saw them as crude horsemen, brilliant in raids but incapable of extended campaigns. Others believe he overestimated his own power, believing the vastness of his realm and the might of his fortresses could withstand any siege. And there's another theory still, that he believed war was inevitable. That no matter what, the Mongols would one day ride into his lands, and better to meet them on his terms, not theirs. We'll never know for sure, but in that not knowing lies something important. A reminder that history is not a perfect record. It is a memory, and like all memories, it's blurred by emotion, reshaped by fear, molded by pride. So as we rest here in the soft dark of history's uncertain places, we listen not just to the facts, but to the echoes, to the rumors, to the truths that hide behind stories told around campfires, whispered in crumbling scrolls passed down through time. Because the story of Genghis Khan isn't just about war and conquest. It's about mystery. And mystery always begins with questions. Close your eyes, let them swirl. And when you wake, the next chapter will be waiting. The Utrar incident. Let's return to the steppe, to the dust, to the heat of sun-scorched stone and the slow, simmering breath of vengeance. The year is 1219. The city of Utrar lies sprawled near the banks of the Sirdarya River in what is now modern-day Kazakhstan. In its time, Utrar was an important link on the Silk Roads, a place where caravans met, merchants bartered, and cultures intertwined like threads in a vast, living tapestry. But on one day, one sharp, fateful day, a caravan arrived that would change everything. According to historian Nicholas Morton, author of The Mongol Storm, this caravan was sent by Genghis Khan himself. It was a peaceful group, seasoned traders, mostly Muslims, carrying goods from the east, likely including beaver pelts, silks, and precious metals, destined for the vibrant markets of Khwarazmia. And yet something about them unsettled the city's governor. His name was Inalchuq. Some called him Ghiyas ad-Din, a man of rank and power, proud of his station, fiercely loyal to his Shah. Why he acted as he did remains a mystery. He ordered the entire caravan arrested. No proof, no trial, just suspicion or fear or pride. Then he did something strange. He wrote to his sovereign, Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, asking what should be done with the prisoners. The answer came back cold and final. Kill them. And so they were killed. Every one of them merchants, guards, travelers, ambassadors of peace. Only one man escaped. Only one who would carry the news like a spark in dry grass all the way back across the plains to Mongolia. The Mongols were stunned. This was not just a violation of trade. It was a breach of honor. A betrayal of diplomacy, one of the few things Genghis Khan held sacred. But once again, the Khan chose words before war. He sent an envoy straight to the Shah. Not to threaten, not to insult, but to ask why what happened could peace still be preserved. What returned was not an answer. It was a message written in blood. The Shah executed the envoy just as he had the merchants. And worse still, he humiliated those who accompanied him, shaving their beards, a gesture of mockery, of emasculation, of deep and cultural disrespect. To the Mongols, this was not just insulting. It was a declaration. And so Genghis Khan responded. Not with parchment, not with patience, but with an army. Utrar was the first to fall. The siege was swift, relentless, and crushing. When the gates finally broke and the city was drowned in fire and cries, the Mongols captured Inalchuq, the man who had begun it all. And how he died is a matter of grim fascination. Chroniclers wrote that molten metal, silver perhaps, was poured into his mouth, his eyes, and his ears. It wasn't just execution, it was a message, a performance, a punishment tailored with dark irony. In Mongol tradition, this was not a typical practice. They were brutal, yes, crushing cities, burying prisoners alive, even building wooden platforms over captives and throwing victory feasts atop them. But molten metal, that was unusual. So why this time? Some say it was meant to mock Inalchuq's greed, to drown him in the very wealth he may have hoped to steal from the merchants. Others point to older echoes to the death of the Roman general Marcus Crassus, killed in much the same way by the Parthians, or the Emperor Valerian, taken in nearby lands, swallowed by defeat and legend. Was it revenge or theater? We may never know. What we do know is this. Once Utrar fell, the rest of Khwarazmia began to unravel. The Mongols moved like a storm, like a plague carried by wind. City after city collapsed, some surrendered, hoping to be spared. Others resisted and were erased. The death toll. It's impossible to know for certain, but conservative estimates place it between 2 and 15 million. Even the lowest numbers are staggering. The Khwarazmian Empire, once vast and radiant, became a graveyard of cities, its people scattered, its legacy trampled beneath hooves. And what of the Shah? Some say he fled in panic, abandoning his courts and generals. That he was chased relentlessly across the sands, until finally he reached a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, where the waves lapped quietly at the shores and the Mongol shadow drew near. A fitting end, but not quite true. According to historian Peter Jackson, the Mongols were nowhere near when the Shah died. They had missed him. He was not hunted, but haunted by a war he had unleashed and could no longer control. He died not with a sword in his ribs, but with the weight of his choices pressing in from every side. His empire, once proud, was gone. And all of it, because of a decision made in Utrar. So much death, so much fire, so much silence. Born from one man's fear, another man's pride, and a caravan that never reached the market. History rarely unfolds as a clean chain of causes and effects. It tumbles forward in human error, misunderstandings, and pride. But sometimes, just sometimes, you can follow it back to a moment. I face a city gate, a single decision. And tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, remember, the mightiest empires fall not always to greater strength, but to smaller things. A message ignored, a beard shaved, a name never forgiven. Sleep well, the step is quiet now. Unanswered questions. Even now, with the ruins of Khwarazmia buried beneath centuries of dust, some questions still echo. They echo not in the thunder of hooves, but in the quiet, the kind of silence that fills the space between historical facts. The kind that doesn't shout, but lingers. Because as we've seen, the facts of the Utrar incident, the caravan, the envoy, the war, are, as historian Peter Jackson describes, based on reasonably reliable primary sources. But reliable doesn't always mean understandable. Not even close. Because we are still left with a haunting question, one that history has never truly answered. Why would Shah Muhammad II and Governor Nalchuk poke the sleeping dragon? Why provoke a man like Genghis Khan, when his reputation had already become a shadow that fell across half the world? This was no obscure warlord. This was not a gamble against an unknown foe. By the time the caravan reached Utrar in 1218, Genghis Khan had already shown the world what he was capable of. Just 3 years earlier, he had seized Jiangdu, what we now call Beijing, a city fortified with massive walls, surrounded by rich dynasties, defended by thousands. And he crushed it. He had also taken northern China and most recently had subdued the powerful Kara Kitai, a dynasty that shared a direct border with Khwarazmia. He was moving west, always west. And everyone could see it. Surely the Shah must have known this. Surely Inalchuk had heard the stories. So what were they thinking? Historians can only guess. Some say the Shah was careful, at least at first. In his own way, perhaps he understood the threat. He had just called off a major campaign in the southwest, where he had been preparing to strike against the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Why, some scholars, like Nicholas Morton, speculate that this decision was driven not by compassion, but by calculation. He saw the Mongols rising in the northeast. He shifted his focus. And yet, even with this cautious maneuvering, when a peaceful caravan arrived at his gates, he chose war. Was it arrogance? Did he believe the Khwarazmian army could withstand the Mongol tide, that his cities were too strong, his lands too vast, his enemies too far? Or was it fear? Did he suspect the Mongols were already watching him, that the traders were not merchants but spies, gathering maps and weaknesses? Maybe he saw the war coming and chose to start it on his own terms. But here, where the story gets even stranger. According to Morton, the Mongols, before the incident, had no immediate intention of invading Khwarazmia. None. They weren't preparing an assault. They weren't issuing threats. They were sending gifts. The caravan carried gold, furs, and beaver pelts, exotic luxuries from the Far East. What did they want in return? Fabric. Simple, elegant fabric from the skilled weavers of the Khwarazmian heartland. A product Genghis Khan had grown fond of during his travels and conquests, a taste acquired not through conquest but through appreciation. Because as terrifying as Genghis Khan was in war, he had a surprising respect for culture. In the lands he conquered, he often welcomed diversity, allowing people to worship freely, to speak their languages, to continue their traditions, as long as they submitted to his rule. He was not at first a destroyer of cities. He was a builder of empires. And yet, his hand of peace was slapped away. And so he returned with fire. But again, we return to the mystery. If Genghis had no interest in war, and if Muhammad knew how dangerous he was, then why? Perhaps it was a miscalculation. Perhaps a miscommunication. Or perhaps, as history so often reminds us, it was simply human nature. Pride, paranoia, the refusal to be seen as weak. These have sparked more wars than weapons ever have. And this one would be no different. Provoking a fight with Genghis Khan. Sometimes history doesn't offer answers. Only questions. Questions that stretch across time like shadows at sunset, long, uncertain, reaching for something just beyond understanding. And so we come to the final thread of this tale. The most perplexing question of all. Why did Muhammad provoke Genghis Khan? Why stand before the storm and spit in the wind? Theories have circled for centuries. One, pulled from the pages of the Mongol storm, suggests that the insult may have come not from an Alchuk, nor the Sultan, but from an Indian merchant traveling with the Mongol caravan, a single man who may have offended the governor with words we will never know. Could it be? Perhaps. But even if this traveler had indeed insulted the governor of Utrar, would that justify the mass execution of dozens of peaceful merchants? And more importantly, would it explain why the Sultan himself doubled down, ordering not only the death of the caravan, but also of Genghis Khan's envoys? That seems less like an insult and more like a message. Then comes the idea of greed. That an Alchuk may have seen the caravan as an opportunity, a rich target for plunder. But here again, the logic begins to fray. As Nicholas Morton points out, Utrar sat along the Silk Roads, one of the busiest trading arteries in the known world. Caravans came and went regularly. Many carried more wealth, more precious cargo than beaver pelts and bolts of silk. Had an Alchuk wanted to rob merchants, there were better targets, safer ones. Why choose these traders backed by that Khan? The most convincing theory, though even it leaves gaps, is this. Inalchuk may have believed the Mongol merchants were spies, sent to scout the region in advance of invasion. Whether this suspicion was rooted in fact or paranoia, it appears he acted out of fear. And the Shah? Well, he may have decided to make a bold move, not out of confidence, but out of dread. Perhaps he saw war with Genghis as inevitable. Perhaps he wanted to strike first, before the Mongols struck him. If true, it would not be the first time in history that a man invited his own destruction, simply to delay the feeling of helplessness. Still, Morton is not fully satisfied with any of these explanations. And neither are we. No single motive explains what unfolded. No theory captures the full weight of the decision, the raw, blinding mistake that opened the gates of ruin. But there is one thing we can say with certainty. The Mongols were coming. Whether by treaty or terror, whether invited or not. They were moving. westward, southward, every direction at once. A tide of horses and arrows, of banners and bone. And Genghis Khan, the Khan of Khans, would not be denied. By refusing peace, Muhammad II opened the door. And once the Mongols stepped through, they did not stop in Khwarazmia. They pressed into Persia, then Mesopotamia, then into the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. They brought fire to Russia and shook the foundations of Christian kingdoms. The world changed because of one choice, one caravan, one insult, one head sent in a box. And that is where our story ends. Or rather pauses, because the Mongols did not fade here. They kept writing and ruling and rewriting the maps of the known world. But that is another story. One we'll save for another night. If you enjoyed this journey through the dust of forgotten empires and the echoes of unanswered questions, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us again for more stories told in the dark. Until then, rest well, traveler. And remember, sometimes the smallest spark burns down the greatest cities. Good night.